Welcome to Sabby Sabs podcast. I'm your host, sabrinasalvati. I do want to go ahead and get right in. I don't want to keep our guests waiting. So tonight we are talking to former Seattle City Councilor Kshama Sawant and former Green Party presidential candidate Dr. Jill Stein. Let's go ahead and bring them in one at a time here. Hello.
Hi.
Hi, Sabby.
How are both of you? Welcome back.
Great to be here.
Thanks for having us.
So this is the first time I've had both of you on the show at the same time. So this should be pretty interesting. I guess I want to get started with this past presidential election. Both of you collaborated here for Jill's presidential campaign. And Kshama, I know that you usually handle things on the labor front, but you were also a city councilor for Seattle as well. And for those who are not aware, Kshama Sawant started as an activist, like you were on the ground fighting for the Fight for 15, et cetera, through Socialist Alternative. And then later on, you became a city councilor. So Kshama has experience working on the local level. Jill has run on the local level and the presidential level. With this particular campaign, I think there was something different this time around with this presidential election. Number one, it wasn't a normal presidential election. We had the incumbent president drop out of the race pretty close to the election. And of course, Kamala Harris was chosen to be the nominee. There wasn't a Democrat primary. There were people that had issues with that. So there was a lot of things that was going on. And then you have a former president running again, which was Donald Trump, who ended up winning the presidential election. The big thing that people have been talking about is the voter turnout. There were about 8 million people, I think the number is now, that they said that stayed home. And that's what I want to hear from both of you. On the campaign trail, Jill and Kshama, what were some of the things that you heard from voters? I know both of you were in Michigan together, I believe, at one point, and I think Seattle. What were some of the things that you heard from voters about this particular election?
Well, first, let me just say that it was several million more who stayed home than in 2020. But in 2020, remember, 1 out of every 3 eligible voters stayed home. And these are predominantly younger, of color, working people, lower income. So it's like the people who are being shut out of the political system are voting with their feet. So there was by no means here, a mandate for Donald Trump, which he's trying to claim right now. There's very much a mandate to change the system because so many people are just tired of being thrown under the bus. And I'll just say in brief, that's what we heard over and over again, that people are outraged. They are sick of the struggle. The fight back that you see in the support for Luigi Mangione and his assassinating a healthcare CEO. The support for that just reflects how utterly desperate people are about our healthcare, about our housing. 1 out of every 2 Americans is struggling to keep a roof over their heads. Some 70,000 roughly deaths every year just from the lack of health insurance, abysmal health statistics, 100 million people who are struggling to get out of healthcare debt, student debt, 40 million. It's a litany of absolute desperate struggles while we're witnessing this, partying on steroids, these elites who are grabbing more and more wealth and resources for themselves and their influence over government. And this was, and not to mention the war machine, which consumes half of our congressional tax dollars, more than half, actually. So our dollars are being spent not on our benefit, and people are struggling to survive and are looking at candidates being rammed down our throats by the corporate media, which is telling us that we are powerless, we don't count, and that resistance is futile. So what we heard from people was just such fight back and such gratitude that they were able to find us despite the mainstream media machine essentially conducting wall-to-wall propaganda and pulling out all the stops to silence us, to throw us off the ballot, to deny our right to debates, to understand who the candidates are, and to have candidates on the ballot that represent us. So we really heard over and over that there is a rebellion in full swing, and it's ready to go. And I think it's more ready than ever. Kshama, I'll turn it over to you to say a few words.
Yeah, I think that the cost of living crisis and the war, the genocide on the Palestinian people in Gaza, and also now the violence in the West Bank and Lebanon were very much issues that we encountered. And in fact, there is no disconnect between what we observed anecdotally and what the polls are confirming statistically. You know, we saw the new poll, the YouGov poll that came out recently, which said that, and it's a damning poll, it shows that Harris's refusal to break from Biden's support of the genocide might actually have cost her the election. I mean, we know this in terms of just having a finger on the pulse of consciousness, but this is now a statistical poll that is affirming that. The poll says that among the 19 million people who voted for Biden in 2020 but then didn't vote last year, nearly a third of those people named the genocide in Gaza as the top reason over economy and immigration, the main reason that is for refusing to vote at all. And of course, what we also saw on the ground that was that a lot of people who were angry about the genocide and the war, and also the war on in the proxy war being carried out in Ukraine, they were also angry about the cost of living. It's not like they were all disconnected. A lot of people I personally spoke to, for example, on the ground in Michigan, were working class and middle class Arab and Muslim people, people with children, with their families. They were all there together at the mosques, and they would say that I'm also having a hard time paying my rent and buying food for my children. So it's not like those issues are disconnected for a lot of people. And I think one of the most crucial things I should mention from our experience, especially in Dearborn, but also elsewhere where we were campaigning. I mean, I'm sure many of your viewers might know that Workers Strike Back, my organization, we not only had a democratic discussion and debate and endorsed Jill Stein as the most important anti-war candidate for president, we also campaigned both in Seattle and in Kansas City and other cities like Boston. But primarily in Dearborn, we had many of our members, including myself, give up our lives for weeks at a time and go to Dearborn, which was really crucial. And there, what one of the things we saw again and again, the theme was not so much that they had to be talked out of voting for Kamala Harris, because the anger against the genocide was so palpable. It was so alive and all pervasive. What we did actually do was talk a lot of people in Dearborn out of not voting at all, like just being passive and convincing them that being individualistic in their anger is not going to yield any results. Not that we're claiming that just voting for Jill Stein is the end of the road, but that building the highest possible vote for Jill Stein was going to be part and parcel of a movement that we need to continue building, an anti-war working class movement. And some of the people we talked out of voting for Trump and explaining to them that Trump is a con man. He poses as a peace candidate, but ultimately he represents, but in his own way, he may be less predictable of a defender of imperialist interests like Kamala Harris, but at the end of the day, he does ultimately very much represent imperialism and US capitalism, and that we can't have illusions in either of them. And I really agree with Jill on pinpointing the issue of healthcare as one of the most pivotal, if not the most pivotal issue that's emerging, and that I think can provide a real ground for organizing. And that's why, I know we're going to be talking about this, but at the organizing conference that Workers Strike Back and I are hosting in Seattle in February, we want to bring forward the question of Medicare for all and really fighting for it at the local level. But most importantly, what kind of movement we'll need for that.
Very, very important points there. And I think that is really interesting. I'm not sure if both of you are familiar with Irony, also known as the Funky Academic, after Donald Trump won. And I think it was immediately after the Luigi incident. Irony said on his show that we need a new third party, and that party needs to run on healthcare. That was his, his idea about it. And I totally get where he's coming from about that. Now, of course, once again, Jill, you're familiar with this. People are blaming Jill Stein for the reason why Donald Trump won again. But I don't know if you guys saw this, but Jessica Burbank, and she's been on the show recently, she's been looking at the data here, and she said, I'll say it again, even if Kamala Harris got every vote cast for Jill Stein, Claudia De La Cruz, and Cornel West, she would not have won any of the swing states. And I think, thank you so much, Jessica, for putting this together. But I think this is important for people to see, because for the people who say it's Jill Stein's fault, it's Dr. West's fault, it's Claudia's fault, or whatever, it's third parties. When you look at the numbers, that is not the case. For example, you can see in Arizona, even with the third party candidates in the race, it shows here that Kamala Harris still would have needed over 169,000 votes in Arizona. So ultimately, it was the people who just did not turn out at all. It was the people who stayed home. And to that, I blame the Democratic Party. It is up to you to excite your base and to get them to come out. One of the questions that I do have, I know the Green Party's goal was to get to the 5%. That didn't happen. I know that's not easy to do. But Jill, can you explain to everyone, because I think this is one of the bigger questions a lot of people are hearing after the presidential campaign. Why is it that in 2016, you got more support? And I think my answer to this is, I'm assuming the town hall. A lot of people forget, but when Jill ran in 2016, CNN gave her a town hall. That didn't happen this time around, right? So that could be part of it. But why do you think you received more support in 2016 than this time around for 2024?
In 2016, there was not a war room that was being funded, with a six-figure budget and with as many staffers as we had in our entire campaign. The Democrats had a war room for the specific purpose of smearing us, of silencing us. When we went to do an interview with Tavis Smiley, he greeted me saying that he had been contacted by someone from the DNC the night before, because they were studying where we were going to be interviewed, and they were then feeding smear questions and smear campaigns to the interviewers, like Tavis Smiley. There was the Democrats were pulling out all the stops. They had hired what they called an army of lawyers to throw us off the ballot. So we had less ballot access than we did in 2016. They hung on to our matching funds, our public funds, so that we would miss certain deadlines. We needed that money, and they refused to give it to us until after the ballot deadlines had already passed, so that we effectively couldn't use the public funding that we had earned. And they also advertised publicly for basically infiltrators and spies and people to manage them. So I think the Democrats were running really scared, because they know that their candidates did not have support. They know that they have basically thrown working people under the bus. So they have lost their base between NAFTA, between the Wall Street bailouts, between throwing out millions upon millions of homeowners in 2008 with the Wall Street crash, between the 1996 crime bill and its incredibly horrific impact on communities of color. They know that they have lost their base. And so that, they've abandoned their advocacy for the migrant community. They have adopted the talking points of Republicans. They've contributed to the outright lies against migrants, saying that migrants are a source of violence and a source of drugs coming over the border. All of that is absolutely false. It's the opposite of what is true. Migrants actually make our communities safer, and it is the red-blooded Americans who are bringing drugs over across the border, not migrants. So the Democrats are very scared, for good reason, because they have abandoned working people. And big money, which we're seeing on such flagrant display right now, with the billionaire class sitting right up there at the podium with Donald Trump. That's going on in the Democrats as well. And they have very much participated in opening the floodgates to bigger money than ever. Elon Musk put $250 million, more than that actually, into Donald Trump's campaign. But the Democrats, they had their own version of that. Most of their money was also coming. They had more billionaires contributing to their campaign than ever before. So Democrats have participated, have been a major driver in the sellout of our political system and the sellout of working people. So they cannot dare to actually face us in the court of public opinion. And their only recourse is to try to silence us, to create fear campaigns and smear campaigns. I think that explains what happened. But then, you saw that with all of the grassroots political campaigns. They were all driven down in their numbers. But within that context, as Greens, we came out in the number one position for grassroots campaigns. So it is all of us. It is our democracy. It is everyday people who are being silenced and shut down by this political system. But within that very repressive system, relatively speaking, we're on a roll. And we know that it wasn't that people rejected our campaign. They never had a chance to even hear about it. And if you looked at the comments on the Breakfast Club, where so many in the young African-American community were hearing from Butch Ware and myself for the first time, the comments, 20,000 of them and counting, basically said, oh my God, I wasn't going to vote in this election. Now I'm not only going to vote, I'm going out to register green. And that put the fear, holy terror into the Democrats' mind. And that's when they actually started conducting an advertising campaign against a third-party campaign for the first time ever. They actually felt compelled to spend money not only on their army of lawyers and their war room to smear us, but also then to advertise on mainstream media to try to shut us down. So, I think people are continuing to learn lessons right now about where this political system is taking us. So, I think it's not only 1 out of every 3 voters who's voting with their feet by saying, I will not support either of these corporate-powered candidates and their parties that are being rammed down our throats, these billionaire parties. We're not voting for them, but people are really ready to get out and start organizing now. And that's what we're going to do at this conference. And we encourage people to, come out, to sign up, come out and be a part of it. You can attend virtually. You can also attend in person. So, this is, as Alice Walker said, the biggest way people give up power is by not knowing we have it to start with. This is about recognizing that power and actually getting organized to use it, because that's the only thing standing in the way of us and really moving forward. Donald Trump is so, what should we say, just horrifically overconfident right now in what he thinks he's doing. In his inauguration speech, he didn't have a word to say about everyday people and working people and the crises in our lives. He had absolutely nothing to say about it, and bashing immigrants is not going to make life better for anybody, not only the immigrant community, but everybody else who depends on migrants for our food, for our small businesses, for our restaurants. There are so many critical, for construction. The American economy is going to really tank in a very big way with the policies that Donald Trump is in the process of implementing right now. So expect this rebellion to grow very big and very fast.
Thank you so much for saying that, Jill. There is something I do want to show everybody. Immigration was a very, very hot topic this presidential election cycle. Doesn't mean it hasn't been brought up in presidential elections. It has, but this particular one, it was a big issue, and not just for people on the right. There were also people that were Democrats or former Democrats that also, particularly from the Black American community, that were also vocal and upset in cities like Chicago, New York, also here in Boston as well. They were not happy with the decisions that were made by the Biden-Harris administration or some of their local politicians and some of the things that they were giving to migrant communities. So that was also another issue. But in reference to the mass deportations, I want everyone to see this because there was a farmer that was interviewed recently who supported Trump and still supports Trump, a South Dakota dairy farmer. He's going to tell you about what's going to happen to the food. Everyone listen to this. This is important.
What percentage of your workers are not U.S. born?
Probably half.
About half?
Yeah.
How many hours does this go on?
It's 24 hours a day. You know, we could milk 8 hours a day, but it wouldn't be feasible or profitable for us to produce milk.
So you need workers like this year-round?
Yes, yes.
Governor Kristi Noem of South Dakota, her farm is just a few miles away. This farmer who voted for her, who voted for Trump, who still supports them, doesn't believe that they would round up immigrants and ask them for their immigration status because it's an open secret that farms in this state are held up by undocumented workers. Are you worried, like some of your other farmers, that if there were a mass roundup of undocumented migrants, that you might lose workers, you might not have enough workers?
Well, the question I asked, how are they going to do that? Within 2 days, we will not have food. There will not be food anywhere.
2 days?
Yes. That's why I predict nobody will be filling the shelves, nobody will be producing food. If we once have to shut down and be gone, it's never coming back.
Does Governor Noem understand that?
I would think so.
You have a lot of faith that they're not going to do what they're saying.
That's pretty much what I'm thinking. So we have to trust in our officials that are put in place.
So he doesn't think that it's going to happen. I have already seen some deportations taking place today. I've seen video footage of that. They were here in Boston earlier today. But I think the point that Jill points to, and Professor Richard Wolff pointed to this as well. And when you tell people this, people will say, well, they can give Americans those jobs. But the problem is those farmers are not going to pay you. They're not going to pay you minimum wage. Number one, they're not even going to pay you $7.25 an hour. They're not paying them that. So I think that's a big part of the problem, that people, whenever you talk about some type of big change like that, there has to be something that is set up in place to deal with that impact. And there isn't anything set up in place right now. A lot of people don't talk about that, but sometimes when you make these type of decisions, there isn't that other thought of, okay, well, what's going to happen after something, what happens with the food, right? That's the big one, I think, for people is food, because we all need food. So that's a really important part there. But the new initiative that both of you are working on, I want to pivot to Kshama here, because a lot of people said, what happens now after that election? And this is pretty huge. This is the February 2025 organizing conference, Fight the Rich and Their Two Parties in the Wars, Fight Trump, $25 an hour minimum wage. Jill Stein, Chris Hedges also is going to be a part of this. And of course, Kshama Sawant. Kshama, I want to pivot to you to hear a little bit about this. It's scheduled for Seattle, Washington, Saturday, February 22nd. Oh, I think you're muted. Sorry. Go ahead.
This organizing conference really is the only effort that I know of. And in that sense, it is historic. It is going to be historic because it is a demonstration of the kind of leadership that working people's movements and the anti-war movement desperately needs, but is completely absent. And I'm glad you mentioned that Chris Hedges will be there as well. I mean, look, you're talking about immigration. So I think the way to frame this is along class lines. Trump represents the billionaire class. So he is not going to take up policies that are going to hurt the bottom line of the billionaire class or be in antagonism to their endless greed. But what he will do, and we should be aware of this, we should not have blinders on about this, is he will actually wreak havoc on the lives of countless immigrant families, undocumented immigrants, and also immigrants in general will feel the dread and families will be broken apart. And it's not going to be anything new. Obama, Democratic President Obama, was the deporter in chief. He still remains the deporter in chief. After that, Trump came on. He brought the Muslim ban. He attempted to do that. In fact, we socialists and union members actually shut down the SeaTac airport here, and that was part of the defiance that forced him to track back on that. But then you had Biden also be very hostile to immigrants, and now you have Trump 2.0. So in other words, what you have is a continuum of these presidents, an endless parade of presidents, an endless parade of bureaucrats, Congress members, senators, House members, state representatives, local representatives of the Democratic and Republican parties, both representing the interests and the greed of capitalism, regardless of whatever rhetorical differences they might have. I mean, look at Biden's record. He betrayed on his promises for $15 an hour. He talked about the public option for healthcare in his campaign trail, and the moment he was inaugurated, there was not a mention of that at all. He broke the railroad workers' strike. He had pro-climate rhetoric and then became one of the historic expanders of fossil fuel. And let's not forget Obama. After he left office, Obama boasted about being a good friend to oil and gas. He literally said, that oil and gas expansion, that was me, guys. Don't forget that, people. That was literally what he said. And so you have on issue after issue, whether it is healthcare, minimum wage, climate, immigration, justice, any of these issues, what you see is both Democrats and Republicans completely betraying working class people and thoroughly representing the capitalist state. And you have what you have had since 2016. I mean, your earlier question was also about what happened in 2024 in comparison to 2016 and 2020. And I think the question of Bernie, as Jill mentioned, is extremely crucial. We had Bernie Sanders' campaign at that time. Remember, there was tens of millions of people energized by the call to tax Wall Street for Medicare for all, $15 an hour. And what happened? Bernie ended up capitulating to the Democratic Party, ended up endorsing Hillary Clinton, and then that ushered in Trump 1.0. And then Bernie's selling out went on and on and on. And then it sort of reached the depths of shamelessness where he, within hours of Biden declaring his re-election campaign, Bernie Sanders endorsed him uncritically, and then he endorsed Kamala Harris. You had AOC go on the DNC floor in Chicago and shout about how Harris was supposedly working tirelessly for a ceasefire. All of this betrayal is at the root of what has happened, where millions ended up staying home rather than vote. And so, in other words, these betrayals have truly damaged the left. They have damaged working people, and we need to have an alternate strategy. Our task now as working people is to get organized independently of the Democrats, independently of misleaders like Sanders and AOC. And let's not forget the labor movement leadership as well. You had Sean Fain, the leader of the Auto Workers Union, UAW, go and cheerlead Harris at the DNC floor. And then now, just days ago, he has an op-ed in the Washington Post saying he is ready to work with Trump. These are misleaders in the labor movement. You have the same in the NGO movement, the BLM misleaders who sold out the George Floyd rebellion. So again, you have a capitalism, which is a system which exploits billions of people and enriches a few at the top. That system is not going to be able to do what it does if it was just a few billionaires carrying out the agenda. The reason the billionaires' agenda has been intact for so many decades is because they have a whole host of defenders in various forms. You have the Democratic Party, the Republican Party, and it suits them for people to be oscillating between these two parties, ultimately just representing capitalism, but looking different, sounding different. It suits the interest of capitalism to have labor leadership and NGO leadership who sound like us. Sometimes they sound angry like us, meaning like working people, but then ultimately also end up carrying out what I would call business unionism, which is again, not directly representing the interests of capitalism, but acting as a gatekeeper against working people's movements, preventing a militant rank and file uprising in the union movement. So all of this is happening, and the only way to come out of this is to build independent working class movements and explaining that we need to fight the rich. That's why the theme of this organizing conference is working class people need to fight the rich. And I have no doubt in my mind that there is hunger for this. I don't feel despair that people are not willing to fight. What's missing is the strategy for fight back, and that's what this conference is about.
Well said there. And for people just joining again, new rally happening February 2025, organizing conference, Fight the Rich in their two parties in the wars, fight Trump, $25 hour minimum wage. This will be Jill Stein, Chris Hedges, Kshama Sawant in Seattle, Washington, Saturday, February 22nd, 10 a.m. PT. Is this going to be streamed, Kshama?
Yes, it will be live streamed as well. And if you are watching this and you are in the Seattle area, even as far as Portland, Oregon, or if you're in Vancouver, BC, we want you to come and join us. If you're able to drive here, please come. If not, watch it online.
This is the type of movement that someone like Bernie Sanders should have been a part of, right? Because Bernie was talking about the corruption, the corporate greed, the billionaires, right? But he's still trying to work with that Democratic Party. Bernie Sanders just voted for Marco Rubio, you guys. I don't know if everybody's aware of this, but Marco Rubio is one of the politicians that Donald Trump chose to be a part of his team here. And Marco Rubio was up for Secretary of State. He is a very staunch Zionist. He was very rude toward the pro-Palestinian protesters. This is what you're getting for Secretary of State. If you thought Blinken was something, here we go with Marco Rubio. And Bernie voted for him. By the way, Marco Rubio would have won anyway because it was 100% of the Senate vote. So Bernie did not have to vote for him. Nathan Robinson from Current Affairs said that he reached out to Bernie's team and he said there's no response or comment as to why he decided to do that. So you guys see what's happening with these parties? So one of the things that it mentions here for the organizing conference, it says we need to use our momentum from getting out the vote for Jill Stein anti-war pro-worker campaign to fight the rich and their two parties, to end the wars and the genocide in Gaza, to fight against racism, sexism, and all forms of oppression, to organize protests and strike actions to win a $25 hour minimum wage, Medicare for all, quality, affordable housing, and good union jobs for all. And I'd like this part here. It says both Democrats and Republicans are dead in for workers, the union movement, and the anti-war struggle. And I think we've all seen this over the past couple of years. And one of the things that I've noticed as well, and I'm so glad that you're doing this conference, because what we saw happen, and I'll pivot to you, Jill, a lot of people were frustrated with Biden-Harris presidency because of a lot of economic reasons, but also, of course, because of the genocide in Gaza. And ultimately what happened is that most of those people decided to stay at home. Some of them voted for you or Dr. West or Claudia de la Cruz, but some of them pivoted to Donald Trump. Mm-hmm. There are a number of people that I met that voted for Trump on economic issues alone. And I don't know why they think that, whatever, but they swung in the other direction. And this is typically, I think, what happens when you have a movement that like Bernie Sanders had, talking about these populist issues, talking about Medicare for all and increasing the minimum wage, et cetera, and you get that much energy behind it. Then when you see those people say, nope, let's just try to work within the Democratic Party and push Joe Biden left, and you see these things don't happen, they don't come into fruition. It has been since 2016. Ultimately, what's going to happen is some people are just going to check out completely, which I think we saw that with the turnout. But then also some people swing all the way over in the other direction because they think, well, the populism on the left failed, so I'm going to go to the populism on the right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And people get swayed by Trump's rhetoric, his rhetoric, his big push to the Arab American community and the Muslim community in Dearborn and in Michigan and beyond, saying that, that he was going to be a peacemaker, that he would respect. I don't even remember what his pitch was, but it was, a totally empty, scary, vacuous pitch. And, what is he talking about now? What great real estate property Gaza would be, how it needs to be made into something, So you don't want to trust this guy further than you can throw him, and you can't throw him very far. So he had that kind of pitch. We met people out on the campaign trail, Hispanics, who were going to vote for Trump, as many did, because, I said, well, why? Why were you going to vote for Trump? And they said, well, because the deportations were much worse under Biden than they were under Trump. So in spite of the rhetoric and the reputations, likewise, many youth were just swayed. Trump was, the Democrats have done a great job of making Trump look like he is standing up for free speech. In his inaugural comments, he was going to shut down censorship. Yeah, like censorship of who exactly? And let's see you support the free speech rights of Students for Justice in Palestine and, for the campus encampments against genocide. Let's see how much free speech is supported there, and it's just his support for TikTok, because the Democrats wanted to shut down TikTok so that we wouldn't be influenced by China, and we've seen how far that went now, because all these people have gone over to Red Note and are loving what they are learning about China and how reasonable life is, and how incredibly, supportive life and institutions are there. People don't have to work 2 jobs. They actually have health care. They can call an ambulance, and not pay $5,000. In fact, the ambulance will come for free. So at any rate, Trump is being made to look like a good guy by how terrible the Democrats are. And Trump has all the billionaires, the richest billionaires lined up behind him, but Kamala Harris had more billionaires than ever behind her campaign. So,
Right.
I think, just if I can just add, I think that just it's sort of your question, Sabby, relates to what you were talking about earlier in terms of the Bernie Sanders campaigns. Because in 2016 there had been a groundswell of support around Bernie Sanders and the demands he raised, and because he capitulated to Democrats afterwards, what ended up happening is that a lot of the working class people who wanted a fight back, who would have supported Bernie, ended up being left with sort of, no political home, so to say. And you can see the real, how palpable this was, right? Think about West Virginia in 2016 in the primaries. I believe Bernie Sanders won the Democratic primary there, and Donald Trump won the primary there, Republican primary, and then he won West Virginia in the general election. The point being that this is a state where you would be tempted to, you meaning the Democratic Party is, has written off as this is a red state. These are the deplorables, the basket of deplorables, as Hillary Clinton called it, and then you had other variations of it emerging last year, derogatory terminology about poor and working class white people. And what did we see there? We saw an enormous opening for the kind of progressive demands that we are talking about, which is higher minimum wage. We're calling for $25 an hour right now when workers strike back, but Bernie was calling for $15 an hour. That had huge support. Medicare for all had enormous support. The support for Medicare for all has only grown. And but because of those betrayals, because of the Sanders and AOC and all these characters completely bending to the Democratic Party, the labor leadership failing at the same time to show any leadership, and again going along cheerleading the Democratic Party, then you had working people who felt completely sold out, ended up voting for Trump. But I think we should also be careful to not overstate it, in the sense that most people, and this goes to what you were saying at the very beginning of the show, most people who were angry at Bernie, the squad, and the Democratic Party as a whole just didn't vote. It's not that most people voted for Trump. Most people just stayed out. And I would say both on that count and both in that and the support that Bernie Sanders got for his demands earlier on, we should draw a lot of hope that if we have class-based campaigns where we can win over working people on the basis of a joint fight back for the kinds of demands that Workers' Strike Back is talking about, I have no doubt that we can build united movements where you can this sort of divide between people who voted, working class people who voted for Trump and working class people who didn't vote at all, or even ended up voting for the Democratic Party. I think many of them are also angry, though many of them just held their nose and voted for the Democrats anyway, because they feel like there was no other option. And as Jill said, many didn't know about Jill Stein's campaigns because of all the attacks and the silencing by the Democratic Party. And so we have a chance and also a duty to expose that, Hillary Clinton's comment of deplorables, Biden's comments calling working people garbage, that all of this shows that people are understanding what the Democratic Party is, that it's a party of the elite, and working people are correctly angry. And it's not just the words they use, it's their policies show that they don't care about working people, not to mention the question of the climate crisis. And so all of this demands that we provide an independent avenue, and that's not going to happen from this existing leadership of these movements. We have to build new leadership from the working class.
Well said. Go ahead, Jill.
Yeah, I was just going to jump in and say that what we really want to do at this conference is help people connect at the level of their communities and to conduct these campaigns at the level of their communities. And so whether it is fighting for a Medicare for All referendum, which might happen in Washington state, or whether it is fighting for a divestment campaign in your community, getting a resolution through your city council, not only to support a ceasefire in Gaza, which is tenuous at best, but also to actually divest. And there are really exciting examples now. For example, in Alameda County in California, where a coalition of progressive groups basically just got through the adoption of a divestment from Caterpillar, divesting $12 million with another $20 million to go, to basically withdraw funding from corporations that are benefiting from the war and from genocide and apartheid, to support the students at campuses in your community who are fighting back, but who are, being pummeled, who are being threatened with expulsion. Here, you may know, Sabby, about the MIT students who exposed the horrific research going on, which is actually sponsored by the Knesset. The research is genocidal research, and its terrifying impacts go way beyond Israel and Gaza and the genocide. They're doing breakthrough basic research that will enable drones to swarm. So instead of being pursued by one drone, you will then be pursued by a whole army of drones. It could be hundreds or thousands of drones that effectively create a drone army. And the same thing for bots, like these terrifying robotic dogs that come out, and they're not widely used yet, but they could be. And so MIT is doing that breakthrough research, and these heroic, courageous students have really put themselves at risk to expose it, and they deserve to be supported, and for there to be a campaign to achieve this goal of getting MIT to divest. So at any rate, we encourage people to come to the conference for us to be able to share prototypes, to share resources around specific campaigns that so many of us could use in our communities to actually help advance the struggle. Because it's really clear, as Kshama has said, this is about the billionaires and their political parties that have sold out to them. They are not going to do what they need to do just for asking nicely. This is about removing them from power. And in the meantime, it's about taking action with traction. And that includes strikes, supporting workers' strikes in our communities, developing our capacity as communities to support the strikes, to have, to develop strike funds and mutual aid and the kind of things that we need to be able to do to support strikes. And it's both for the sake of workers and their contract negotiations or getting recognition for local unions. But it's also about the work that we then have to do together on these other issues. We need to be able to move beyond asking nicely, beyond this concept of lobbying and political threats, which we need. We need political threats, but we also need action. We need to be able to actually pass divestment campaigns. We need to be able to exercise economic boycotts in conjunction with strikes and really assert our power. As Malcolm X said, it's not that we're outnumbered, we're just out-organized. So this is about sharing that power of organizing.
I agree 100%. Kshama, I want to come to you about healthcare because this is another thing. I wrote an article about this recently about the Luigi situation, and that obviously you can see there's an outcry from people in the United States on different sides of the political aisle that have very, very big issues with the healthcare system in this country, and they've been affected one way or another, or someone close to them has been impacted by the healthcare system in this country. So if one were to ask, particularly with this movement, like with the worker movement, how would we accomplish Medicare for all if it's not done through Congress? What would be a strategy that you would have for that?
Yeah, this is a pivotal question. I'm so glad you're asking that. And I want to weigh in on that. But since Jill brought this up, I thought it's really important for me to just say that I concur with her points about having solidarity with the courageous students on various campuses who have been taking on personal sacrifice of various kinds, quoting arrest records, the chances of expulsions, and certainly the mass numbers of suspensions in building an anti-war movement. It's very important that we stand in solidarity with them. And if any of those students are watching right now, I want to let them know that Workers Strike Back and I stand with them 100%. And specifically, I wanted to mention these two students who were recently interviewed by Chris Hedges, Prahlad Iyengar and Richard Solomon, who both MIT PhD students. And, Prahlad was talking about how MIT is basically getting ready to expel him. And so these are just draconian consequences that are being meted out to these students by these campus administrations, many of them very much aligned with the Democratic Party. And so at the end of the day, we cannot build this anti-war movement if it is just left to students to carry out this personal sacrifice. Really what we need is, in the coming semesters or quarters, as the case may be, we need a massive expansion of the campus anti-war movement by building mass rallies of thousands of students. There are many, many students who will support if there's a call for a mass rally. We also need to invite the rank and file of the labor movement in a much bigger way than has happened, really put pressure on the labor leadership, on the campus union labor leadership, to come out and stand against the war and call for an end to US military funding for the Israeli state. And I think all of this also connects to, just the strategy that we need for the fight back on the war issue is the kind of strategy we need for winning Medicare for all anywhere. I mean, as Joe was saying, those of us who are organizing the Workers Strike Back conference, we really want to put forward this idea. And I personally really strongly believe in this, that we have to act locally, that is municipal, county, or state, not because it's going to be easier. I really don't buy into this really false idea that, things are easier at local, so we should run local. And, Jill, why did you run for president? That sort of thing we encounter all the time. I want to be very clear that regardless of whether it is municipal, county, or state, or at the Congress level, we can have zero illusions in the political establishment. Neither the Republicans nor the Democrats are going to be on our side. And we have to understand quite how entrenched the stranglehold is of the hospital industry, of the insurance industry, of the pharma industry, all these multimillionaires and billionaires. they are going to come down like a ton of bricks on any effort to build Medicare for all. We have to know that going in. And this is not something that I'm saying because I think so as a socialist. We've seen this happen again and again in California, which is a very progressive state, meaning that the ordinary people in California lean progressive. You saw the Medicare for all effort being brought forward by lots of forces, including the California Nurses Union. So these are not small forces. These are pretty strong forces. Them bringing Medicare for all effort at the state level in 2017 and in 2022. What happened both times? There was a Democratic governor both times. First, it was Jerry Brown. Then it was Gavin Newsom. You had a state Senate and a state assembly overwhelmingly dominated by Democrats, roughly around 80%. And yet the Medicare for all efforts went down in flames. And I'm sorry, that's a bad metaphor given the massive and tragic LA fires. But my point is that the efforts completely were wiped out because there were illusions that the Democrats would do it. And I think that's the same clarity we have to have in Washington state as well. We, Workers Strike Back and my organization, Revolutionary Workers, we strongly support whole Washington's efforts. But at the same time, we have to understand that the Democrats in Washington state are not going to do this because they are in the pockets of the insurance and pharma industry. And one example that I should mention where Medicare for all like effort was actually successful, obviously not in the United States, but Canada. How Canada won its public health care is crucial to understand. It didn't happen from any of the main parties of big business, not the Liberal Democrats or anyone. It was a small party called the CCF, which was a Cooperative Commonwealth Federation, which was led by socialists, Marxists like myself, and they were able to win Medicare for all like effort, socialized healthcare in Saskatchewan province, public healthcare in Saskatchewan province. And that became so popular that people started demanding around the country in Canada that they wanted universal healthcare. There was a 1949 Gallup poll that showed that 80% of Canadians at that time wanted universal healthcare. So the response to this successful program was so great that that's what put pressure on a conservative federal government in federal parliament to enact nationwide healthcare. So that shows that regardless of whether it's Democrats or Republicans in the White House, we are going to have to fight. And also conversely, regardless of who's in the White House, we can win, but we will need this kind of fighting strategy, which is independent of big business parties.
I think that is so incredibly important for people to hear because Kshama is right. It doesn't matter if it's Democrats or Republicans in charge. They're going to be against Medicare for all. They're bought by the pharma companies. People really got to understand that. But I agree with what you said there, Kshama. I think that is a good strategy there to have. I want to shout this out again for people who have just joined again. That is February 22nd, Seattle, Washington. Kshama Sawant and Jill Stein are organizing a conference. It's called the Organizing Conference, Fight the Rich and Their Two Parties in the Wars, Fight Trump, $25 hour minimum wage. Jill Stein, Chris Hedges, of course, and Kshama Sawant. Again, that's February 22nd at 10 a.m. PT. Kshama said this will also be live streamed as well. So I'll continue to give you guys updates about this particular conference. This is something that, honestly, considering what this organizing conference is about, this is something that Bernie Sanders and AOC and Ilhan Omar should all be on board for, because these are the types of things that they supported, right? So what you guys are starting to see is, again, you have to fight outside of the two parties. We tried fighting within the two-party system. And obviously, as you see, Dem leadership has a way of shutting things down. So I think this is a great idea. And Kshama, if you want to tell people about to register for the event.
Yes, people can go to Workers Strike Back website. So that's Workers Strike Back, all one word, workersstrikeback.org. And you'll find a link to register. So regardless of whether you can come in person or you can watch online, we want you to register so that we can send you all the information. So definitely make sure you join in. And as we were saying earlier, one of the main themes of this conversation will be the strategy for Fight Back, and specifically what is the strategy needed to win Medicare for all through a ballot initiative at a local, city, county, or state level.
Well said. All right. Jill and Kshama, thank you so much. And Jill, so great to see you here, Jill. And even though people online right now are saying Jill's nowhere to be found, it's a coordinated PR effort happening right now on people.
Yeah, I mean, it is kind of to die for in a way. It just reflects how running scared they still are. And the fact that they're still conjuring me up like their worst threat, bring it up. It's a bit
it's like simultaneously Jill accomplished nothing, and also she's responsible for everything bad. And I think they're having to drum up this again and again because it's becoming more and more exposed that that Biden refused to do the ceasefire. He refused to do all the things he could. And so they're doing that. The same stories have been said about me as well. I was simultaneously responsible for doing nothing at all and also ruining the entire city. And keep in mind, ruining it with $15 an hour Amazon tax and renters' rights. And I should mention before I leave that $15 an hour minimum wage that we won, Sabby, Jill, I don't know if you heard, but that was under attack by a Black council member in Seattle, Joy Hollingsworth, and her fellow Democrats. She brought forward a bill to completely attack $15 an hour last year, but Workers Strike Back fought back. We said that any council member who goes and votes on this, votes in favor of this, needs to be pulled out of the city council, needs to be driven out. And that's the kind of fighting message that forced them to backtrack on it. And starting January 1st, Seattle's minimum wage workers are getting $20.76, which is by far the highest minimum wage.
Woo. Wow. That's awesome. And the fact that they continue to attack you and attack me reflects that they don't have a strategy. I mean,
that's right.
They have abandoned working people, which is why the Democrats lost this election. And now they're incapable of even fighting back against Trump. When you see 100% of the Senate voting for the Trump's nominees for the Secretary of State, not even a single person standing up against, the endless war machine, which is what, their Secretary of State nominee will continue to support. They are not fighting. They still are incapable of fighting. They're all about collaborating and finding a way to get along. They're going down to Mar-a-Lago, to have their conversations. They are still not fighting for working people. And that is why they are attacking us, which again, it's a badge of honor, and it's a, it's energy and support that we need to seize this moment. It continues to be the perfect storm.
Yeah, and I just wanted to say, Jill, that they're not only not fighting for working people, they're fighting on the other end. They're fighting to attack the things that we have already won. And I should mention, it would be remiss of me not mentioning this, Joy Hollingsworth, the council member I mentioned, who brought forward the legislation to attack the minimum wage law. She was actually endorsed by the Martin Luther King County Labor Council in glowing terms. She was endorsed by UFCW 3000, the biggest union in Washington state, which represents underpaid grocery workers. I mean, so in other words, to be clear, the leadership of the Labor Council, the leadership of UFCW 3000, all of whom get paid $250,000, $300,000 salaries, they get paid handsomely, while the members that they supposedly represent languish when they are not even able to pay rent. So many grocery workers are living in their cars. So the leadership of these labor institutions endorsed Joy Hollingsworth in glowing terms, and then she turns around and stabs union members and working people in the back. That's the true nature of the Democratic Party.
Absolutely. And we're seeing the same dynamic on the climate, where the Democrats basically passed their Inflation Reduction Act, which required 60 million acres offshore to be auctioned off, and 2 million acres of public lands onshore to be auctioned off every year before any renewable project could be supported. So and it was actually, in spite of the rhetoric, it's the Democrats who have always exceeded the Republicans in expanding fossil fuels. So it's a very bullshit framework right now, and people are horrified and really desperate for something positive to rally around. And as much as we felt it during the campaign, I think it's even more clear now because people so get that there was no strategy, that, you know, there's buyer's remorse if they dared to vote for either, you know, to be fooled into voting for Trump or to have voted for Kamala Harris. There's just widespread remorse right now. And I think it's really important for us to rally around, you know, working people and the values that we share and the power that we have, and to reject this propaganda of powerlessness, and to just move forward like a bat out of hell. You know, we got to rescue our future, because unions, you know, traditional unions and political parties and nonprofits have betrayed us. They have completely betrayed us, and it's time for a reboot here with people-powered political power.
Awesome. Jill and Kshama, thank you so much for your time.
Thanks so much, Sabby.
See you there.
See you, Jill.
Bye, Kshama.
Bye-bye.
All right, guys, that was Dr. Jill Stein and Kshama Sawant, again, talking about the conference that they have coming up in February. Again, especially if you're in that area, be sure to check that out. That is the organizing conference, Fight the Rich and Their Two Parties in the Wars, Fight Trump, $25 an hour minimum wage. Seattle, Washington, Saturday, February 22nd. That'll be Jill Stein, Chris Hedges, and Kshama Sawant. Don't miss that. Kshama also said they are going to stream that as well. So stay tuned for that. Again, guys, there are ways that you can fight outside of these two parties. And I think it's important that we do spend more time focusing on that. I know I talk about mutual aid, but especially for those of you that are activists and you're looking for something else to do, that's a great thing to participate in. Hey guys, this was a Sabby clip. If you like what you saw, hit that like button and subscribe.